Good afternoon, everyone. This is our January 22nd, 2021 IEEE-USA legislative update coming from Washington, D.C., a remarkably quiet and peaceful Washington, D.C., which is quite nice. I'm Russ Harrison, Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA, and welcome to our update. Before we get started, I'll remind you if you have any questions about things that we cover today or don't cover today, you can put them in your chat box and I will try to rotate back to them at the end of the presentation. And with that, we'll get started. It's always a optimistic time when we install a new president. And as I'm sure you're all aware, Joe Biden became our 46th president when he was sworn in on Wednesday. And you know, this is all these periods of transition. It takes time for a new administration to get put in place. It takes time to get a new Congress up and running. And so while the pieces of the Biden administration and pieces of the 117th Congress are starting to fall into place, we're not really at a point yet when we can start actually talking about bills that are going to move and what's happening here and there, with one exception, which we'll get to in a minute. One thing that we have begun to see is who exactly will be part of Joe Biden's team. And in Washington, there's an expression that people are policy. In other words, the people you put into senior roles will determine what it is that the administration ends up doing. And in the science world, the Biden administration transition team was very eager to make a statement by putting forward a roster of senior scientists and very distinguished individuals to be the president's science advisors. A couple of them are up on your screen now. Kay Koizumi will be the chief of staff of the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the White House. Kay is a longtime friend of ours. When he worked at AAAS for several years, he was really the guy behind the creation of the Campaign for Science, which is now Science is Us. And so I worked with him directly then and look forward to working with him with OSTP. Just as a note, there's something wrong with the picture. I took all these pictures right off the White House website, and somebody squished Kay's picture because his head is not actually that thin. But Kay's a good guy, scientist, PhD scientist. Eric Lander is a PhD biologist, mathematician, and former head of the Human Genome Project. He will be the director of OSTP and the president's science advisor. And in a first, President Biden has elevated that position to the cabinet level. So Dr. Lander will be directly advising President Biden. Probably. Just because you're in the cabinet doesn't mean the president's going to listen to you, but it does increase the odds considerably. The co-chairs of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, which is sort of an informal advisory board the president set up, Francis Arnold and Maria Zuber, PhD chemist and PhD geophysicist. Also, by the way, alphabetically the first and last members of the new administration. And if we look broader than this, the same themes can be seen. Miss Arnold is a Nobel Prize winner, and Miss Zuber was the vice president of research at MIT and a distinguished international scholar in her own right. These are top-tier scientists across the board. And as you look broader than that, the trend continues. It is clear that President Biden tried to fill his administration with some very accomplished individuals. Good side is it demonstrates that President Biden intends to prioritize science, which is good. Excuse me. And these folks are obviously very smart. They understand the research world. They understand the world of science. And so they should know, at least in theory, what it is that the government should do to promote science. Little bit of caution, however. In the past, we've had some very distinguished scientists and other professionals put in positions of authority in the government, and sometimes they do a fantastic job. The problem is just because you're a PhD scientist or even a Nobel laureate does not mean you know how to run a bureaucracy. And the skill sets are a little bit different. And so we'll have to see if these folks are able to be as successful working with the government as they were working in a lab. But so far, this is very optimistic, and we're eager to start working with them. We can learn something from the two people who appear to be the top two White House staffers on immigration, Tyler Moran and Esther Oliveira. Both actually come from the same place called the Immigration Hub. Immigration Hub was a nonprofit that was set up about 4 years ago to kind of house some of the immigration people coming out of the Obama administration, to give them a place to live until they could go back into the next Democratic administration, which they have now done. Both Ms. Moran and Ms. Oliveira are advocates for immigrants professionally. Both of them worked on kind of the low skill side of the immigration world. Amnesty, the DACA program, Dreamers, undocumented aliens, refugees, that side of the immigration debate. But they do understand the immigration system very well. They both came from Congress. Ms. Moran worked for Senator Harry Reid, and Ms. Oliveira worked for Senator Kennedy. So they understand the Hill, they understand politics. I suspect they will be good folks to work with. We are going to have to do a little work educating them about the high skill side of the immigration equation. I'm sure they're aware of it. IEEE-USA worked with Senator Kennedy, directly back in the day. And I was not with IEEE-USA at the time. But my understanding is that they worked with the IEEE-USA staff, worked with Ms. Oliveira while she was there. So she knows us. She knows the issues. The question is, how much of a priority will the new administration put on high skill immigration? And we have a sign, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. A couple of other advisors of note: Jennifer Granholm, former governor of Michigan, will be the new Secretary of Energy. And Ann Neuberger will be the Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technology. Ann Neuberger, is not someone I know. She's actually a former NSA analyst and a senior person at the NSA, which is why we haven't talked to her until now. But we look forward to reaching out to her and working with her to help her understand emerging tech trends. President Biden placed on his website prior to his inaugural, so this is the transition website, a list of his 7 priorities. And I just list them here precisely as they're written on the website and in precisely that order. COVID-19 response, yeah, that's going to need to be number 1. Then climate change, racial equity, the economy, healthcare, immigration, and restoring America's global standing. Of these 2 are the ones that we're, of course, most interested in. Economy, Senator Biden has said, President Biden has said he's interested in looking for ways to strengthen our tech industry, using the technology industry to bring jobs to this country, to create jobs for Americans, all of which are exactly what our priorities are this year. And of course, immigration. The president is focusing on low skill mostly, but there may be opportunities to do some work on the high skilled space as well. Again, more on that in a minute. I was asked after my presentation last week to talk a little bit about the demographics of the 117th Congress. So here's a little bit of information for you. This is as of a week ago. It includes the 2 new senators from Georgia. However, it does not include a representative from the 22nd District of New York. That race is still being adjudicated. A judge made a ruling earlier this week on some absentee ballots and early voting ballots that were discarded, which might put them back in play. Currently, Republican Cynthia Tenney has a 29-vote lead over the Democrat. So we'll see how that goes. But nobody's won that one, so they're not here. If Ms. Tenney ends up winning, that would add another woman, bringing up to 14 women in Congress. The number of women in Congress going up 15 instead of 14. But either way, it's about 27% of Congress, which is progress over where we were a decade ago, but still, obviously less than half. On the religious side, The 117th Congress is actually slightly more Christian than the 116th, with 88.5% of the House and 86% of the Senate self-identifying as some flavor of Christianity. Most of those are Protestants, although there are more Catholics than any other single denomination within the Christian world, both of which reflect how American society is. Interestingly, only one member of Congress, Senator Sinema from Arizona, has said that she does not have a religion, that she does not believe in God. This is notable. There's a couple other legislators who refuse to answer the question, which is perfectly fine. I bring this up just to note, Senator Sinema is an interesting person on Capitol Hill. The Senate tends to push people to kind of a common demeanor and a common way of behaving, and this senator is not. I think currently of all the people in the United States Senate, she is the most likely to do whatever it is that she wants to do, which makes her, I think, a pretty cool senator, and certainly one I enjoy watching. Age-wise, the average age in the House is 58. Average age in the Senate is 64. Both of those are down a smidgen from the previous Congress, but not dramatically different. The youngest member of our new Congress is Congressman Cawthorn from North Carolina, who is 25, which is rather irritating because that is dangerously close to half my age. The oldest member is Congressman Young from Alaska, who is 87, will be turning 88 in May. In the House, we have a list of committee chairs. The House is getting itself organized. The committees are starting to function. The subcommittees need to be developed soon, and the membership kind of at the margins of the committees has to be established. But we know who's in charge. In the Democrats, looking at the key committees that we care about, the leadership is exactly the same. Education and Labor is Congressman Scott from Virginia, Bobby Scott. Energy and Commerce is Congressman Pallone from New Jersey, who, by the way, represents IEEE headquarters in Piscataway. Judiciary Committee is Congressman Nadler from New York. Science is Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson from Texas. And Small Business is Congresswoman Velasquez from New York. Again, all the same chairman from last year. Republicans, the ranking minority leaders of each committee, has changed a little bit. Of note is Energy and Commerce will be represented by Congresswoman Rogers from Washington, with whom we have a good working relationship. And the Judiciary will be taken over by Congressman Jordan from Ohio. Congressman Jordan is interesting because we worked with him when he was a freshman. He was one of the guys that helped us move the STEM Jobs Act, which almost produced some very important reforms to the EB visa program. Mr. Jordan, Congressman Jordan, who was a freshman at the time, was one of the guys that really helped get that through the House. And so I'm looking forward to working with him as a member of the Judiciary Committee. Well, he's been a member, now he'll be ranking minority. The Senate, on the other hand, is a little more complicated. As I mentioned last time, because of the two elections in Georgia, both of which were won by Democrats, there's now a 50-50 split in the Senate. Because the Democrats control the White House, they control the vice presidency. Vice President Harris will have the opportunity to break any ties in the Senate. But she's not a senator. And in fact, because the Senate is run by the majority leader, there is in fact no majority leader because there's no majority. In the past, what has happened is the minority, the party without the White House and the party with the White House, got together and worked out a deal that allowed the party that controlled the White House to act as majority leader, but with fewer powers than a normal majority leader would have. That has not happened yet. Frankly, that's not too surprising. It's only been a couple weeks and there was an inaugural in there, plus some other events here in DC. So the fact that Senator Schumer and Senator McConnell have not negotiated a deal yet is not surprising, but they haven't. And it appears that central to the fight between the two of them is the question of the filibuster. Filibuster, as many of you know, is a rule in the Senate. It's not a law, but it's a rule in the Senate that's been around for a long time that says legislation can't pass without 60 votes. And the purpose of the filibuster is to make sure that anything that passes the Senate has at least a little bit of support from the other side and has broad support across the country. So you can't just get half the senators to approve something. It has to be 60%. The exception to that are budget bills, because you have to pass a budget. Budget bills can be passed with simple majorities. So there has been the filibuster has been kind of chipped away over the last couple Congresses. First, it was removed for all judges except for the Supreme Court. Then it was removed for the Supreme Court as well. There was pressure put on the Democrats, Senator Schumer in particular, to get rid of the filibuster entirely this year, allowing the Democrats to do whatever they wanted in the Senate as long as they were unified. Problem is, Senator Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, has said he won't support getting rid of the filibuster. He wants to keep it. Without all 50 votes, the vice president's vote doesn't count, and so the Democrats can't do it. So Senator McConnell has asked that part of the formal agreement between he and Senator Schumer be an agreement, a promise by Senator Schumer not to get rid of the filibuster. Senator McConnell, when he was majority leader, kept the filibuster for everything except Supreme Court justices. And he's asking Senator Schumer to do the same thing. Senator Schumer has said he's not going to get rid of the filibuster, but he doesn't want to formally promise that because at some later date, he can see a bill that is very important to him or his party that the Republicans are blocking. And Senator Schumer has said he wants to use the filibuster as leverage, or the threat of getting rid of the filibuster as leverage to force the Republicans to allow him to pass controversial legislation. At the moment, this is all regular back and forth. That this is just negotiation, and it doesn't represent any, irreputable change from how the Senate usually operates. They're just negotiating through the press, which is fine. However, until that happens, the Senate can't get itself organized, because until there's a Senate majority leader, they can't pick chairman for the committees, and they can't pick new people for the senators for the committees. Among the things that agreement between Senator McConnell and Senator Schumer has to say is what is the partisan breakdown of every committee on the Hill, in the Senate, rather. Now, the expectation is that it will be 50-50, just like the Senate, because that's how they normally do it. But they can't do that until there's a majority leader. And so at the moment, Republicans are still running the committees and still have more votes on most committees than the Democrats do, which puts pressure on Schumer to reach an agreement so that his guys can take over the committee structure. So because the committee membership hasn't been set yet, and because the committee chairs have not been put in place yet, we don't know precisely who the chairs in the Senate are going to be, but we can make some reasonable guesses. The Democratic side, Commerce, Science, and Transportation will be run by Senator Cantwell from Washington. Senator Manchin from West Virginia will take over the Energy Committee. The HELP, which is the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, will be run by Senator Cantwell's colleague from Washington, Senator Murray. So both senators from Washington will have senior posts in the new Senate, which makes IEEE members in Washington uniquely important. We'll get back to you in a minute. Judiciary will almost certainly be taken over by Senator Durbin, who will also remain the Democratic whip in the Senate. And small business will be taken over by Senator Cardin from Maryland. The Republican side is a little less clear. It looks like Commerce, Science, and Transportation will be run by Senator Wicker. Energy will be Senator Murkowski from Alaska. That is almost certain. We don't, however, know who will take over the HELP Committee. That could have been Senator Alexander. He was the next in line for it, but he retired. So it's not clear who's going to take over. Judiciary looks like it'll go to Senator Graham from South Carolina, whom we've worked with for many, many years on immigration reform. And small business will be taken over by Senator Rubio from Florida. So these are folks, we've worked with all of them. I don't see any particular problems there. Interestingly, the Energy Committee with Senator Manchin and Senator Murkowski, both of those senators are kind of mavericks in the Senate. Manchin is by far the most conservative Democrat in the United States Senate. He also represents the most Republican state in the country represented by a Democrat. And so he kind of does his own thing. Senator Murkowski she is a Republican, but she was actually elected as an independent because she lost a primary. And thus she tends to do her own thing anyway. Plus she's from Alaska and they just do things differently up there anyway. Both of which suggest that the Energy Committee might be unusually productive this year. The two senators like each other. They've worked together well in the past. And we may be able to get some decent energy legislation out of the Senate this year, even if the rest of the institution does not work terribly effectively. So we don't have a lot of legislation yet because the committees aren't set up and it takes time to get Congress going, but except for one. Can I keep doing that for a while? President Biden has sent a draft piece of legislation to the United States Congress. Now, as president, he cannot introduce legislation into Congress. The two branches are separate. But he can suggest that they do something, and that's what he's done. He's called it the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021. This is a comprehensive immigration reform bill that includes legalization of undocumented aliens, legalization of DACA kids, an expansion of a number of immigration programs, and a reduction in enforcement of immigration laws inside the United States, most of which we don't take a position on. However, there is a section on high-skill immigration, and this is notable because last week, as late as the end of last week, we were being told by folks in the transition team that there would be nothing on high skill in this legislation. Then when it came out yesterday, there was. When you're the new president, you can do stuff like that, and that's perfectly fine because what President Biden is proposing is very similar to what we would have proposed if he had asked us to write it, I think. This is what is in the bill. The bill would eliminate the EB visa backlog by, among other things, recapturing unused visas from previous years. That is an idea that IEEE-USA has been promoting for about 20 years. It will ease the path to citizenship for STEM graduate students, produce work authorization for the dependents and spouses of H1B workers, will ensure that children of H1B workers don't age out of the program. This is a big deal. Because of the EB backlog. Because of that backlog, some people can be trapped on an H-1B visa for 10, 15, 20 years. Well, when you're on an H-1B visa, your dependents, your spouse and your children are allowed to come into the country with you and stay here with you until your kids turn 18. And when your kids turn 18, they're no longer dependents, they become adults, they lose their legal status in the United States under their parents' H-1B. And this can be a problem, particularly if, a child came to this country with his or her parents as an infant and is now turning 18, they may have absolutely no memory of the country that their parents came from. Yet because of problems in the green card system, they could get kicked out of the country, which is obviously not good. So that's a good idea. The Citizenship Act also eliminates unnecessary hurdles for employment-based green cards. And authorizes the Department of Homeland Security to adjust green cards to address macroeconomic conditions. Now, the obvious question for you all to ask me at this point is, what does all that mean? And the answer is, I don't know. What was released to the press was not a legislative proposal, but a fact sheet on the legislative proposal. And which is why I have this quoted in here. The bill eliminates unnecessary hurdles for employment-based green cards. That could be very, very good or very, very bad, depending on what those hurdles are. But the fact sheet doesn't articulate that. That's exactly what it says about that, and that's all that it says about this. Which is not to say that we shouldn't be excited about this. This proposal echoes a lot of the things that IEEE-USA has been fighting for a very long time, and does not, as far as we can tell, contain an expansion of the H-1B program or a relaxation of the H-1B rules, which is fantastic. Now, this bill is a long, long way from passing. Odds makers in DC are not giving it a particularly good chance of passing because of the other pieces, which don't necessarily affect us. But this stuff could, in theory, if it's done correctly, and we have to see the actual language before we can say that, but if it is, it could be broken out into an independent standalone bill should the big bill fail and we may be able to get some high-skill visa relief even if we can't get this comprehensive bill passed. A little bit more news on immigration front. The DHS has issued its final rule on the allocation of H1B visas. We talked about this last week. The Trump administration had originally proposed doing it in quartiles. So they'll fill all the requests that we're paying in the top 25% for a given position, then the top 50%, then the next 25%, and then the next 25%. Responding to criticism from industry, the Trump administration, this was done before President Trump left office. So the Trump administration adjusted the numbers. So the way the H-1B will be allocated is they'll fill every job that pays in the top 10% for that particular job in that particular geographic area. Then they'll do the top 72%, then the top 53%, and then the top 35%. And the effect of this will be to generally shift downward the amount that companies have to pay their H-1B workers. Now, this is probably bad in some cases, as some companies use that wiggle room to exploit their workers. On the other hand, it will make it easier for younger workers to get an H-1B visa, which is important for recent college graduates. And even if this isn't perfect, it is remarkably better than what it was before, and clearly rewards companies that are overpaying their H-1B workers, which is something we support, because an H-1B worker making more than American workers is clearly needed by the economy, because if there was an American willing to do the job, they would be. We've also heard from the transition team, although not the administration yet, that while this is a President Trump rule, President Biden may allow it to stand. President Biden withdrew another rule on H-1B visas yesterday. That rule, it had to do with wage rates, and it was good, but it wasn't done through the proper process for doing a regulation, so it probably would have been thrown out by the courts anyway. But this rule was done right. It's a good rule. It will help, and we're hoping the Biden administration holds on to it. Having said that, there are already a number of lawsuits pending against this rule change. So we'll see how those goes. But a little bit of good news, at least for now. Now, the lottery starts on April 1st. So if this regulation is still in effect in a couple months, it will apply to the 2021 H-1B visa class. Our CVD is on for 2021. Our Congressional Visits Day, which we're calling a Congressional Virtual Visits Day for 2021 because none of you can come to Washington, is on, and registration is currently open at IEEEUSA.org/CVD. We invite all IEEE members in the United States, and I mean all student members, retired members, members who are not American citizens yet. All IEEE members in the United States are invited to register. The way this is going to work, we're currently collecting registrations. We already have over 40. We're going to take the registrations we have as of March 1st, break them up into little teams, so based on your congressional district and state, and we will then be arranging virtual meetings with both your senators for all the registrants from your state and your representative for all the registrants from your congressional district, plus maybe a couple others, just to make sure nobody does this alone, starting the last week of March. Now, I say starting the last week of March because since this is a virtual meeting, you don't have to do it on any particular day. And so if your congressman is available for a face-to-face virtual meeting, the 15th of April, well, we're going to take it. Because the messages we're delivering are not timely. They're kind of big picture, this is what you should be doing kind of messages. And it's about the relationship building more than the messages itself. So once we get all the registrants, there'll be a dialogue with you and with your legislator to find a day that works for as many of you as possible. So I encourage everybody, all IEEE members out there, to register for the CVD. It's free. And it should be fairly easy to participate this year since you won't have to come to Washington. And a quick reminder of IEEE-USA's priorities for 2021. These are evolving, and this list is a little different than the one I had given you before. As we watch what Congress is doing and watch what Congress is talking about, we will adjust our priorities to match theirs, since, they're the ones making the laws, we got to work with them. The Endless Frontier Act and the CHIPS Act still appear to be on target this year for a big push from Senator Schumer. There is increasing talk around DC about an infrastructure bill, and we will be pushing for broadband and electric grid reforms in that bill, should it materialize. Immigration reform is always a priority for us and will be a priority for Washington, as President Biden has already made clear. As I mentioned, there's a chance of some pretty significant energy reform moving in this Congress. AI, artificial intelligence, and other technologies more broadly, helping legislators, helping the new Congress understand technology and its effect on society. And lastly, NASA needs to be reauthorized this year, and so we expect to work with the science committees on the NASA reauthorization bill, helping Congress set our space priorities for the next 5 to 10 years. Next update is February 5th. Can't believe we're already in February. 1 o'clock, same as usual. And I'll remind you again, if you have any questions about things that I touched on that didn't make sense or you want more information on, please put them in your chat. I will rotate to them in a moment. But before I do, I'm Russ Harrison, Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA. My phone number is 202-530-8326, and my email is r.t for thomas.harrison@IEEE.org. Please feel free to reach out anytime. And with that, I'm going to switch my screen real quick here. There we go. And if you have questions, okay, I don't see questions. Oh, it's my boss, Mr. Welby. I will, of course, be very responsive to. Steve Welby has asked thoughts on network neutrality and 5G policy. There's a little bit of buzz around that around the Hill. I don't think it'll be a top priority, but it could definitely come up. But those are kind of, net neutrality can very quickly get into the kind of political debate over Parler and Twitter and Facebook on who gets to use it and what are the rules for using it. And I think if that happens, the odds of something actually happening are basically zero because it'll just become highly partisan. Hopefully it won't come to that. I assume the Biden administration will not be adopting the Trump administration's position on net neutrality. I'm not sure what they're going to do. We will have to talk with them about that. Clearly, some regulation of the internet is going to be required at some point. It's just too big, too important, and too complicated to just be a free-for-all like it was back in the 90s and the early part of the century. But there's not terribly close to a consensus on what exactly it should be. IEEE-USA's position on all of this has been to help legislators understand how the internet really works and try to help them look past kind of the rhetorical attacks that various groups launch on this issue and help them understand that there's, real things going on in the background that can be broken if the regulations aren't done right, and to help legislators do whatever it is that they want to do correctly. Do we have plans to work with other engineering societies on infrastructure? We always have plans to work with the other engineering societies and the other scientific societies. I can tell you that the science societies are mostly focusing on research infrastructure, meaning our national labs and university research facilities. And so far, they've gotten a very chilly reception from legislators on Capitol Hill, which is why IEEE-USA is probably not going to focus on that specifically. We'll support it, but we'll probably be focusing more on the broadband and electrical grid, which have gotten a better response. Now, all of that assumes that there's an infrastructure bill. I'm sure many of you will recall that I have talked about the fact that Congress is trying to do an infrastructure bill and working on an infrastructure bill and intends to do an infrastructure bill for the past 5 years, and they didn't. And so if there is an infrastructure bill, we will be working with whomever we can work with, and that will likely include some of the other engineering societies. The civil engineers, by the way, will probably not be part of that group. Not because we have anything against the civil engineers. They're a great group. They work right over there a little ways. It's just that their priorities are different than ours here, in that the civil engineers are very concerned about money for roads and bridges. Which is fine. We like our roads and bridges, but we're focusing on subtly other things. So we won't work with civils, but we can work with a lot of the other engineers, and we will if we can. All right, I don't see any other questions just yet. Again, once we log off, if you think of something, you have my phone number and email. Please feel free to use it. And until then, welcome to the Biden administration. We are optimistic about getting to work with a new team of individuals here in Washington on both parties. And this time of year is always a time of optimism. We can do anything we want between now and the end of this Congress. And we're going to persist in believing that until it's proven to not be true. So I look forward to talking with you all again on February 5th. We should have a clearer understanding of what the congressional priorities will be. The committee structure should be forming up nicely by then. And we may, if we're lucky, have a presidential budget, but probably not, because it usually takes a new administration a couple more weeks to get it done. But we'll be able to talk a little bit about budget priorities by then. So please tune back in on February 5th. And until then, please stay safe and happy. And I look forward to speaking with you in a couple weeks. Thank you.
I had the coolest job that any electrical engineer could ever have on the ground crew for Solar Impulse 2, the first solar-powered airplane to fly around the world only using the power of the sun. IEEE-USA has given me a competitive edge because of their support system. It is so much easier doing something and being out of your comfort zone when you have someone there saying, "You got this." IEEE-USA is more than just a network. It's a family.